Well, I can't really say that I'm too distressed that the series stopped after this. But, Battle for the Planet of the Apes basically recycles a lot of the same. Not only does it continue the story of conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which you would think would fill in the blanks. We saw how the apes rose and conquered humans, or at least we saw all we needed to see. But it also recycles several problems with Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Whereas Conquest was just meh. I mean, it was just strictly middle of the road, I thought. Battle for the Planet of the Apes is more along the line of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is not so much in story structure, but in terms of quality. I think it's probably. I'm trying to think. Is this worse than Beneath the Planet of the Apes? In some areas, I think it is, and I think some of the hostility that I feel towards Beneath the Planet of the Apes stems from the fact that it came on the heels of the classic, the original, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes is just the fifth one. So when something gets to number five, I think we as audience members have kind of learned to predict that, yeah, this is probably not going to be very good unless they are starting with a completely clean slate. It could get pretty stale, and this is pretty stale. But Battle for the Planet of the Apes picks off several years after Conquest, where Caesar and his ape followers, who are now capable of speech like he is, are trying to live in peace with several humans, including McDonald from the last movie, who they are keeping as pets and or compatriots. It's supposedly post-apocalyptic Earth, although looking at it, you wouldn't necessarily gather that because there's still greenery all over the place. We never really get any. We never really get any sense of scope that we got in the first one. Where I digress. So Caesar is trying to organize this peace between humans and apes by employing human teachers to teach apes and humans the ways of speech and writing and whatnot. And he hopes to eventually be able to trust the humans enough to where he is eventually able to integrate them back into society, where humans and apes can eventually, not anytime soon, live as equals. But every step Caesar feels should be treated with the utmost caution. Caesar is now married to the ape that he fell in love with, I guess, from the last movie, still played by Natalie Trundy, I believe. And he has a son who he named after his father, Cornelius. However, soon MacDonald informs Caesar that the world may not necessarily live to see the eventual peace between humans and apes. On top of this, Caesar's plans for eventual peace are jeopardized by a hot-headed guerrilla general named Aldo, played by Claude Atkins. And in addition, there are humans marshaling an attack force. These humans who were affected by the nuclear attack that happened presumably in between movies. So these humans are supposedly, according to Caesar, malformed. They are aggressive, hostile towards apes. So you have all these factors, and as a result, you have a movie that doesn't really know how to juggle all of these factors. Well, I can't really complain about the performances. I mean, Roddy McDowall as Caesar still shines, even though he's regrettably not given as much to do this time around. Because the thing with Caesar is that there was a real sense of a character arc in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Whereas here, he's already on top. so the character arc isn't really as apparent. There is one there that they try and squeeze in regarding eventually trusting the humans, but this isn't really fleshed out as much as it could have been. And you'll probably hear me say that a lot about many plot lines in this movie. Is that this could have been interesting had they elaborated on it more. Part of me wonders, were they trying to make 2 or 3 movies? Because there's enough material here for 2 or 3 movies. It doesn't really feel as messy as something like Amazing Spider-Man 2 did, but at the same time, it still feels kind of meandering. It still feels like it's kind of going from one plot line to another without really any sense of clear linear focus. Aside from Roddy McDowall, none of the other performances really seem all that inspired, because Claude Atkins, Severn DeVerne, I hope that's, I know I just butchered his name, but the guy who played Culp in the last movie, he's back as Governor Culp this time around, one of the humans who was affected by nuclear radiation, one of the malformed humans. Caesar's wife, Caesar's son, even McDonald are all relegated to these relatively flat supporting roles. They are not entirely forgettable because you do remember them, but they're not really as ripe for audience investment as previous Apes movies have been. Because in previous Apes movies, you remembered and you cared about Taylor, you cared about Zira, you cared about Cornelius. You saw reasoning behind Dr. Zaius' actions. But here, Aldo is just your standard hot-headed general guerrilla guy. He makes General Ursus look like some Shakespearean villain, General Ursus from Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Again, it's not really Claude Atkins' fault. It's just the writing makes him a completely one-note character. And a very boring one as a result. Same with Governor Culp as the leader of these kind of pre-Mad Max style humans, who again are supposed to be malformed. Governor Culp is one of the very boring villains from the last movie, which shocks me, because why would they want to recycle the villains from the last movie? I don't know, because the villains from the last movie were some of the most boring and uninspired villains imaginable. And the humans are even more interchangeable this time around, because every single one of Governor Culp and his followers are just dressed in all black. There is very little differentiation between them. They don't really have much in the way of personality. Maybe 1 or 2, but they only have a few lines of dialogue. Really, Governor Culp and Aldo are the bad guys, and they are not very good bad guys. They're not very interesting. And Caesar's wife, I will give this to the movie, Natalie, and I will also give this to Natalie Trundy. She does get a bit more to do this time around, but again, I wish we had gotten more interaction between her and Caesar. Same with Caesar and his son, and again, what eventually happens to Caesar's son, I'm not really sure how deep I should go into spoilers, because this movie is several decades old. It's just like Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, there are so many missed opportunities here. And with Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, I was willing to forgive it, because again, there were plenty of strong moments. Here, there are barely any moments in this movie that really stand out all that much. And if they do stand out, it's because of how kind of cheesy they are. Because the apes and the humans, the apes versus the humans at the end, that is kind of cheesy. And I'm trying to think. Well, the characters, like I said, don't really work. Really, the only character who I ended up caring about at the end was, again, Caesar, and is partially attributed to Roddy McDowall's performance. But again, he doesn't really get a whole lot to do because the movie just seems really intent on trying to set up these other characters like Aldo, and Governor Cole. And really, the writing, the script doesn't really seem to register with the writer or the director that these characters are not interesting. Really, the only interesting character out of all of the characters that we follow in this movie is Caesar. I don't care about General Aldo because he's a one-note character. I don't care about General Cole or Governor Cole because he's a one-note character. And devoting screen time to these characters, if you're not really going to give them any sort of genuine depth, really takes away from time that could be otherwise spent with Caesar trying to come to terms with his rule. And in addition to that, there are some things about this movie that just don't make sense. Because why would McDonald wait all of these years to tell Caesar that the world is going to end eventually? And he learned this information from Caesar's parents, from videotapes of Caesar's parents. You didn't think that was important information to tell him first? Tell him when he first led the ape uprising? You didn't think... Are you telling me that didn't really cross your mind? Really? So when they finally do go searching for answers, there really is a sense of, oh, finally, now you're gonna get on the whole end of the world thing. And again, as a result of the messy script, or not really messy, it's just completely unfocused script. It comes as a little out of nowhere when the humans and the apes all of a sudden just decide to live in peace. Again, they had tried throughout the movie to set that up as one of the central plot lines, but again, it's not really given much gravity because we don't really see much in the way of Caesar's change of heart to where he is able to fully trust humans to decide their own fate. Granted, he's not mistreating them, or at least he's trying not to. He's keeping Aldo off their backs, but having them not allowed to say no to apes seems pretty counterproductive. I understand what they were going for, like trying to forget the years of persecution and refusal that the apes suffered at the hands of the humans, but again, with the supposed ultimate goal of peace, it seems kind of like a method of unintentional sabotage. And again, there are interesting ideas here. This is not a completely unsalvageable movie, at least in terms of its writing. It is pretty much unsalvageable in terms of its budget, because the budgetary limitations are more apparent now than ever before. But in terms of script, you could address that apes and humans are not black and white. That is an issue that they sometimes bring up in this movie. But the thing is, they never talk. Really, the two heads of these mindsets are Caesar, who wants to live in peace with the humans, and Aldo, who really wants to persecute the humans. But not only do they not give Aldo any depth, which that would have made his character a bit more interesting, as if they gave him this past of being ruthlessly tortured or experimented on by the humans. That would have actually given him a little bit of sympathy for his cause. But him and Caesar, they don't ever really sit down and talk. They don't really have any meaningful conversations. They just have these petty squabbles, you know. Caesar like, you will learn your place, and Aldo's like, no, Aldo is in charge, blah blah blah. They don't really ever talk about the moral implications of slavery. They don't really talk about the fact that not everything is as black and white as some would have you believe, because apes are perfectly capable of killing apes. Really, who is the better being if apes are enslaving humans just as humans once enslaved apes? And what would have also contributed to this is if someone actually called Caesar out on his supposed on the supposed pet position of the humans. Really, what are these humans if not in servitude to the apes? They're not allowed to leave. They are performing tasks for the apes. True, they're not exactly shining their shoes, and you do have the occasional human who is in some sort of authoritative position, but really the humans have no power over apes. They're not allowed to say no to the apes. They have no means of controlling the apes. The apes are just kind of the apes are just kind of it's kind of suggested that they listen to the humans and that they not mistreat the humans. And that does not stop someone like Aldo from from making a monkey out of McDonald the teacher, or not McDonald the well McDonald and the teacher. So yeah, it's just this, and the movie, instead of focusing on these complex issues and instead of really developing some of these characters like the humans and the gorillas, it really just kind of falls back on these kind of again, it's the same problem with Conquest, only amplified here. You know exactly where it's going. You know that eventually the humans and the apes are going to do battle, but the lead up to that does not really generate much in the way of audience interest. So really, I was just kind of counting down, looking at my watch to see when the fighting would start. And even when we actually get to the fighting, it's handled okay, but really, what is the point of an action scene if we don't care about either of the characters? Again, the only character I actually really was invested in was Caesar. And at times, he doesn't really seem like he's the star. At times, he's kind of sidelined. Again, to make room for characters that from the beginning are not interesting. They don't have interesting backstories. They don't have very interesting personalities. So, yeah, Battle for the Planet of the Apes is not very good. And again, these are just kind of minor gripes that have to do with budgetary limitations. But again, it is kind of distracting. I can't really talk about this movie without talking about some of the holes in the effects and the overall polish of the movie, or lack thereof, because the ape suits, not only are they more interchangeable here than ever before, but a lot of the time their mouths barely move, their faces barely move. Roddy McDowall makes out okay, and some of his ape companions, like Virgil the orangutan, they make out okay, but guys like Aldo, guys like the lawgiver, who's played by John Huston for some reason, the lawgiver, who is essentially the narrator. Why they decided to go with a bookend like this, I will never know. But in hindsight, it was kind of distracting, because I was like, is that Gandalf playing an orangutan? Yeah, John Huston. John Huston is probably the most apparent in terms of clearly not being able to work through the ape makeup. I'm, again, not saying John Huston is a bad actor or was a bad actor. Far from it. It's just that whether it be due to the faulty nature of the ape mask, whether it be due to the direction not being very confident, whether it be due to just these actors not really knowing how to work through these difficult ape masks, I don't know, but a lot of the times the apes' mouths just don't close. How do they form consonants? And in addition to that, there's one point in this movie, and this was not an isolated incident, because I ran into it a couple of times. There's this one point in the movie where these the evil humans, the evil black suited humans, are talking, and you know how a lot of times in movies they do ADR, like additional dialogue recording, after they do the principal photography, whether it be to make some of the dialogue louder or more clear, etc., etc. I mean, even the biggest budget movies do ADR, but the thing is, it seemed like when these two humans were talking, it seemed like they accidentally recorded some background noise or some static when they were doing ADR. or at least that's what it sounded like to me. Maybe something else went wrong, but whenever these two humans were talking, whenever they would speak a line of dialogue, you would hear this kind of faint static in the background. And when they were finished with their line, the static would stop. And then the other human would talk, same kind of static. And when the human was done talking, the static would also stop. And I just said to myself, did I really just hear that? Uh, yeah, yeah. Battle for the Planet of the Apes, not their best entry. And looking back on the original Planet of the Apes series, none of them are god awful. It's just that considering how surprisingly thought provoking a lot of them are, to see one of the entries that does not take advantage of metaphor or allegory or something like that. To see an entry in the series that really does not just results to a tired old movie plot, or a conventional movie plot is pretty disappointing. Again, if I were to watch this movie on its own, taking away any comparison to the original movies or to the first four movies, and just looking at this on its own, I can't really say it's awful. But again, it's the fifth entry in the series, and by comparison, it just seems kind of unpolished and stale. That's really all I got. And I wish the original series had gone out on a higher note, but little did I know that the worst was yet to come.